Meeden/Baohong paper today. I'm so excited. Let's do it. Thank you to Meeden for sending me this paper. If you are excited to try some Meeden paper for yourself, use code Aquila, Aquila 12 at meedenart.com for 12% off your entire order. The Meeden paper we are testing today is the 140-pound cold press block of 10x7 sheets. If you're new here, I'm Jess, and I teach watercolor artists the 3-3 method for watercolor painting, the 3 principles, the 3 properties, and the 3-step process. And if you're a beginner, I have an entire program on YouTube just for you. I'm testing out the techniques I use the most often, my favorite 6 techniques, on Meeden 140-pound cold press paper. I'm comparing it against my other 2 favorite papers, Fabriano Studio 140-pound cold press paper, which is only 25% cotton, and Fabriano 300-pound rough paper, which is 100% cotton. I tested these techniques with ultramarine blue and opera pink, and the color resist technique also uses quinacridone gold. Let's see how they stack up. There are 2 big things I noticed with the Meeden paper that are quite a bit different from the other 2 papers I use and love. The first one being the lack of texture on their cold press paper. So even for a cold press, you can see it's pretty significantly less textured. And you can notice that with the lack of granulation on the Meeden compared to the Fabriano Studio, and especially compared to the rough, which we would expect. Rough paper is going to have more texture and cause more granulation. So a lack of granulation, very smooth surface, especially for a cold press paper, although it's not as smooth as hot press. And the second thing I noticed is that it was challenging to have a very high level of precision on the Meeden paper. You'll see that if you complete the paint along with me of this orange cat, but I in general found it has this kind of haziness, this fuzzy quality that definitely enhances some aspects of painting pet portraits, but it was a little bit challenging, and I think most of that probably is just because I'm so used to working on my Fabriano Studio and on my Fabriano rough paper. So I have to keep that in mind, because all in all, you can see that the Meeden paper did amazing. I was so impressed at the spreading, the ability for it to deposit pigment in the edges when you drop in water, the blooming that just happens. It handled water resist, color resist, lifting, and scraping beautifully. You can see that there's really pretty negligible differences between these examples, in my opinion. I really was impressed by the Meeden paper. It does that fuzziness, that kind of haziness is the best way I can describe it. It almost lifts up color too easily, and so you have to navigate that if you're trying to be very precise. But it's also kind of fun. So I think it's honestly just something you have to get used to if you're going to try working with the Meeden paper. But there's really not much else I can point out as far as differences. I think for how well the Meeden paper lifted, it still stained a bit more than the Fabriano Studio and then the Fabriano rough paper. But I was impressed at how fast I was able to achieve these results working on the Meeden paper. Having said all of that, I would say Meeden paper is absolutely worth the try, especially if you do like paper that has a little bit less texture, or if you're a big fan of hot press paper. I would also recommend trying Meeden paper if you have had a hard time achieving blooms or those beautiful pigmented edges in your work. And obviously it worked phenomenally for my other 4 favorite techniques. Again, I think the trouble and the issue I had with it, as I do with almost any new supply that I try, is that I'm very much used to the supplies I typically work with, and this was different, so I had to get used to it. But if you haven't quite found the paper that you love yet, I would highly suggest giving Meeden paper a try. Let's paint this orange cat together. We are going to be painting on the 10x7 block of 140-pound cold press Meeden paper. You can find all the rest of the supplies that I'm using today at paint333.com. Before we start painting, I just wanted to show you side by side the unedited and the edited version of the reference photo for today's paint along. You can clearly see that the edited version is a lot different. All I did was increase the saturation and increase the contrast. I mean, really increase the contrast. Brighten it up like crazy. And don't be afraid to let the dark areas get pretty dark. I like to do this to my reference photos to help set me up for success for when I sit down to paint. I found that doing these 2 things, playing with the saturation and the contrast, helps get rid of information that I don't necessarily want to paint. It helps ensure that I don't overwork my paintings and only paint the information I really want to make sure I convey in my art. And of course, the edited version of the reference photo and the tracing for today's paint-along is in the video's description. Let's start by masking out the whiskers. I have my PBO masking fluid and I like to apply it with a palette knife. In addition to the techniques that we tested out on the Meeden paper, I was excited for the opportunity to test out masking since it is something I do often. While we wait for that to dry, I think we could just get started on the eyes. And the colors I'm using for today's paint-along are quinacridone gold, azo yellow, opera pink, and then I have a little bit of neutral tint here just so you can see it. This isn't normally where I have it on my palette, but it's over here as our fourth color. And I'm gonna grab a nice heavy mix of that on kind of a swiped, blotted level brush, not too wet. And I am using my silver black velvet brush, which is what I love to use for fine detail. And I'm just gonna go in and kind of give myself outlines so that I know where the darkest dark shapes are. So everywhere I see black, I'm just gonna go in and go ahead and paint black. And this would be the part of the painting where I would want to be the most fussy and the most detailed. So I know sometimes it's interesting to see artists take so long on just such a small section of a painting. And I am one of those artists that will do that for these really important features on a pet. But then you can kind of relax into it and just zone out and paint the rest of it much quicker, much faster after you get these details in place. So I just encourage you to take your time here and get these eyes and the nose, which we'll do next, just right. And my black color is neutral tint, which is my favorite black. Oftentimes I would use some ultramarine in eyes, but I really want to keep this painting very warm. So I'm gonna go ahead and just skip that this time, and we're gonna see what happens if we do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint the black on the nose. And I'm trying to be careful not to touch the masking fluid that we've put on the painting. I also like to have a blotter brush handy, so I'm just using a size 6 round brush with water only that I've blotted, and I can kind of soften in any of those black outlines that may have gotten a little too intense. I think while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and drop in some water and see if I can kind of paint around the black nostril shapes, leaving a little bit of a white edge there. And maybe we can kind of finish off the nose here right away. So I'm going to take another size 6 round brush, and get it wet here. And I'm just going to drop in some opera pink, a nice heavy mix of opera pink on a brush that I like to just kind of swipe along the edge of my palette so it's not too much. I'm going to drop that right at the base of the nose. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab another round brush. Mine are usually size 6s. This is pretty small, so I wouldn't be opposed at all to, you know, using smaller brushes, but I just use what I have. I don't like to have too many brushes hanging around. Okay. I don't typically like what happens when my azo yellow mixes with neutral tint, but I love what happens when it mixes with my opera pink. So I'm hoping it'll just mix with that opera pink and look really nice. I'm going to take my blotted brush, so that's just my water brush here, and I think the masking fluid's dry enough, which is, we're going to hope it is, because we're kind of going down into it a little bit here. And I'm going to just tap the nose and say, hey, you can come over here now, too. And go along the shapes of where I would see the darker dots in the cat's muzzle. Those darker areas. So just allowing that beautiful pool of color in the nose to go out along the snout area here too, the muzzle. And that'll help maybe encourage it. Kind of bring some of that color down too. And I have my grainer brush, of course, and maybe getting a little bit of texture down too, while we have this nice pool of water happening. There's quite a big pool right here, so I'm going to lift some up with my water only brush and lay down some more, if I can, some more of that azo yellow at the top. It's kind of a game of matching the wetness of your brush to the wetness of the paper so that you actually lay down your paint while having enough pigment on your brush for it to show up. Dropping down a little bit more of that opera pink at the base of the nose. And maybe over in the nose too. And then I'm just spreading it around with my wet brush here. I'm going to drop in some water right in the middle of the nose. We'll see what happens with that. And I'm going to drop some water out on the snout too. And then I'm going to, let's see, maybe put a little water right where there is that dark area on the lower lip. And see if we can make that defined. Opera pink and some neutral tint there could maybe give us that kind of purple color that it looks like is, I need to spread this out a little bit more here. So taking my water only brush, putting some water on that shape. There we go. Just needs a little bit of water. And then moving it around with my grainer brush. And I think it needs a little bit more color too. So more pink and more neutral tint. Coming in with my water only brush that's been blotted, and I'm just going to facilitate that to mix around a little bit and drop in some water. I really like that. Let's see if we can add a little neutral tint to those dots we see in the muzzle, and maybe down that center area too. It's got to be at that kind of perfect dryness level where you get a nice soft edge, but then the neutral tint doesn't just explode and go everywhere. And then I'm still using that grainer brush a little bit here too. I have some pretty color kind of residual on this grainer brush. So maybe we can give the whole muzzle a little bit of an outline here. I'm going to drop in some yellow on the edges while these shapes are still wet. And let that blend in. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like when we take the masking fluid off, because oftentimes it just takes away quite a bit more than I was expecting it would. And then we have to soften in the edges quite a bit. I love the purple that we were able to achieve with just the pink and the neutral tint. So fun. So this is just a fun time while this is at this almost dry stage to make sure we have all the color that we want, and even adding more color than we think we need, because watercolor always dries lighter. I just love how it looks already. This is fun. This is fun paper to work on. I would say it dries faster than I'm used to. So maybe it'll lend itself, you know, it would be harder to paint big maybe, but maybe you'd probably just need to add more water with that. Wouldn't be too crazy of a problem. Okay, I'm cleaning up my palette knife. Still had some masking fluid on there. I'm wondering if I can scrape some of this color. Cats just have the most intense, cute whiskers. So I love to get that in there. And I'm dropping some water so it can move around and dry in cool ways. I think this is a good segue to go ahead and maybe finish off this shadow shape underneath the cat's nose. So I'm just going to come in, I have my grainer brush. I'm going to come in with just plain water and focus more on this side, I think. And do a pretty shadow, which I think I'm going to leave yellow out of. I'm just going to try pink and neutral tint and get a little bit of a purple shadow. All right, let's move that around with our grainer brush. Make sure we have enough water in there so it mixes. There we go. As much as I love the grainer brush, I don't want it to be too harsh. I'm going to run into just having pink over here, because then we can transition into that yellow a little bit more pretty if we do it that way. So mixing that in here with my grainer brush. Yeah, that looks really cool like that. And I think I'm gonna do the same thing with just a little bit of a shadow shape here. So I wonder if we can, I'm gonna put a little bit of neutral tint right along here and then along there, just to distinguish those shapes a little bit better. So we can really tell that the cat has a chin and a little neck area with these kind of changes in value. We can have a little bit more fun. So not too worried about complete accuracy on this part of the cat. Maybe a little water resist while that's drying. Put in some strokes with just water, blotted water on the grainer brush. See if those show up. They do. Very pretty. It's handling the techniques I like very, very well. But I think I'd like to do a little bit watery. There we go. That looks cool. That looks cool. I'm wondering, I'm just thinking, do I want to do anything with that? Soften it at all? I don't know if I do. It just looks really neat like that. Put in a little water. I don't know if it needs it. Sometimes you just gotta let things go, you know? Pretty cool brush stroke shapes you can have happen on the paper. See if we add a little bit of pink. I don't want to have too much. I don't want it to take all of our attention away from the rest of the cat. And maybe a little bit of a yellow shape, tiny bit of a yellow shape. I really like that. It's cool. I think this color is behaving in really cool ways on this paper. And I think things are happening a little faster than I am used to. Probably it's because it's the smoother surface, the smoother texture, with their cold press being a little bit smoother than I expected. And that it's 140 pound paper. But my the black on the eyes is still a little bit shiny, which is surprising. Let's go ahead and do the ears. So I'm going to do one of my favorite things, and there's something we've already done. The other thing, okay, hold on. I love water resist, so I'm wondering if we can, I just can't stand it while this is still in this matte stage. Seeing if we can get some pretty, a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and paint with water. You can see I clearly have this left side of the paper, the dark side of the cat. I'm just going to dye this water I'm painting with a little bit of pink so you can see where I'm putting it down. And I think I'm going to just take it as one congruent shape here all the way to the other ear. This reference photo really lends itself to that. So one nice big ear headband. And I'm putting a lot of water down just because I feel like this paper is drying quickly. So I'm going to move from, I haven't laid down any quinacridone yet, and I do want to do that, but I am going to move in general from pink to yellow. So laying down some pink and then some yellow. And I'm doing heavy mixes here all around. Nice heavy mixes of color. I love the orange that you get when you mix opera pink with azo yellow, and I knew that would be the perfect color combo for this cat. Such an orange, pretty orange cat. All right, we're gonna dive in and see what happens when we add a little bit of quinacridone. And this is such a bully. This color just pushes other color away, and it also, in my opinion, I feel like it dries it out. All right, here's the other thing I really want to do. I'm gonna just add a nice pool of this quinacridone to that shape and then connect it to the shape. Even though technically it's not really that connected, I'm going to connect it with water here mostly, and then let it drift into the other shape. So I'm trying to get a nice heavy mix of the quinacridone. And then also putting it where there's obvious darker orange spots on the cat. But really, really focusing on this side. I'm going to just go ahead, since we're here, put some around the cat's eye. And I'm still using this quinacridone. I'm going to come in with my plain water brush and soften that shape in a little bit. Not too much, it's very wet, so I don't want it to run too hard. And then I'm going to come in and do the same thing, but with yellow, I think, on this side. Now, still feels risky to me because that neutral tint looks like it's still kind of wet. It's weird. And coming around for the shape on that side of the ear. All right, I'm gonna grab my grainer brush now while this is wet and just pull some of that pretty color into the dry areas so we know that these are furry shapes. But we don't have to be too literal either. I want to bring this down, and I know that's not quite what's actually happening in the cat. Put some more pink here too. And this is so pretty. This pink is so pretty, and this cat is so pretty. I'm gonna let, maybe if we can, this pink shape totally run down the side of the cat. See, I still want to maybe use my grainer brush over here a little bit. I love a good brush stroke shape, which I think is kind of how I want to leave this yellow. It's just so pretty like that. I think I'll, and even here, it's just really beautiful. All right, the other thing that this cat has is some intense ear hair, which, you know, as far as I know, all cats have. So I am going to get a little bit of that showing with the grainer brush, and then hopefully scrape some of that out too. And I think I want to drop in water, boop, right here, and let it run over here. This is very pooled. All right, I'm going to maybe put a little bit more yellow here. There we go. Let's just see what happens. I don't think these are ready yet. But I do like a combination of scraping while it's really wet and then scraping when it's almost dry. Let's see, we have this beautiful time where we can maybe have our quinacridone stay where we put it, but still be a little bit soft. You can catch these moments before it dries completely. So I'm just putting the quinacridone, nice heavy mix. I'm actually using a size 2, mostly because I ran out of size 6s with all the colors that are on the other brushes. But I'm just putting these little moments of quinacridone in while we have this time before it dries completely. Oh wow, this is an intense bloom. I'm going to soften that a little bit. That just seems distracting, like too distracting, I think. So we can catch it before it dries completely. God, that looks pretty neat. Kind of lifted the layer beneath it, that black. But we can always glaze too if we need to. So just still thinking about where a little bit of this quinacridone might look good, because it really is dispersing, so I'm kind of finding myself needing to apply it a few times. I like this moment of pink being the only moment of pure pink. The rest of it really blended into these red-brown colors. I think that ended up looking really cool. So I'm still waiting for those ears to get a little bit more dry so I can scrape them. So I'm just jumped over to the nose again, and I'm kind of lifting and blending the color at the top of the nose, lifting a little bit of it out to make it a little bit more reflective and a little bit brighter and cuter. And then, if I can, I would like to soften that color around those white edges we saved. I'm lifting a little bit to give this nose a little bit of dimension, but I don't want to lift off that pink. That pink shape is so pretty. And then I'm also softening that neutral tint a little bit around the nose itself. It still looks pretty wet. Oh, that's pretty. I can scrape some of that quinacridone off. I always get so excited when I hit the perfect timing for scraping, and then I end up doing too much scraping. Oh, here we go. We're getting some timing here. All right, I think I'm gonna let this dry completely, and we'll come back in and glaze and finish those eyes. All right, so this first layer is nice and dry. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the masking. I'd say that removed really nicely with my kneaded eraser. I'm gonna go ahead and do a nice layer for the iris. So I'm going to paint with water. I'm going to dye it a little bit of quinacridone here so you can see where I'm going. So a nice pool of water, and just taking care to paint around those reflections of white that we want to save. And then I'm going to come in with our quinacridone. And really focus putting that along the edges of the eye. Especially the top edge of the eye. It's pulled quite a bit here. So I'm just going to lift off some of that extra water. And it picked up some of that neutral tint. And then I'm just going to, as it dries, just kind of play with it here and making sure I have it nice and a deep gold where we want those darker values in the eye. So I'm lifting out a little bit. This is cool. It's a staining color. So it's giving us the illusion that we almost used different colors in the eye just by lifting off some of that color on the edges, on the light side edge, I should say. It's really pooled here too. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that water and lay down more pigment. Making sure I really get it at the top there, because that's kind of where the shadow is over the iris. So I really want to make sure that that's a very dark brown color. So I have a very heavy mix of my quinacridone that I'm putting down here, kind of blotting it on. and it's just naturally filling up the rest of the space. And if it fills it up too much, I just lift it off. Okay, I'm going to babysit that while it dries, just to make sure it's still dark at the top and light at the bottom. But I think it would be nice to just glaze a little bit and soften this masking fluid. So I come in with a blotted brush, so water only, and I'm just kind of scrubbing the pigment around the masked lines that we removed to make them a little bit softer. All in all, I think the masking fluid behaved very well on this paper. And I kind of extended the pigment that got picked up here to make these whiskers kind of longer. I'm not using the thinnest brush in the world for this, so my whiskers got a little bit thick there. So right now I'm just kind of going around and softening these edges and bringing in the pigment that lifts up while I soften into that white area. It really makes quite a big difference. I really like it. It just softens. So it looks really nice. I really like that look. I can even give it a little shape. Give him some shape around his face by bringing in some of this color. Kind of nice, kind of fun. Adding a little color too. This paper I found, it lifts. You can lift color really nicely, very easily. It almost lifts color more than I anticipate. Okay, I'm just going to drop in some water here and see if it'll push the pigment to the edges a little bit. Sometimes I try to lift at the same time, but I gotta make sure I put water back. Okay. And sometimes I jump around at this stage where I'm kind of just finishing things up just to do things as I see them. So I'm just adding a little yellow here to the nose. But I am going to continue softening around the whiskers and then basically almost just softening around most of the shapes that we painted. So I'm extending as I pick up and soften, just extending the whiskers too. I love cat whiskers. Just so cool. I might leave these ones white. I don't think I'm going to extend those out on that side. I just want there to be more of a fill in the blank feeling on the light side. Pretty things are happening in that iris. I'm excited to go in and soften those reflections too. The other thing is I really loved how that pink is right here, and I am wondering if I can emphasize that a little bit more by adding a little second layer of that pretty pink color. Just to make it stand out even further. And glaze a little bit more yellow on the light side. Sometimes the light reflects off kind of the dark side. You just think about how the light is coming in. So you might put the highlight color on the dark side of the painting because that's kind of the way that the sun is shining. Try not to get too glaze happy because it is very easy once you just see how fun it is to glaze. You want to do it everywhere, and I am so guilty of that. That is so very much what I like to do. All right, I might glaze with, I'd want to say pink, but I think I'm going to make it orange. Just because I really love this pink at the nose and I don't want to take that away on the rest of, I don't want to make that lose the emphasis that it has by putting it in other places too. Isn't this cool how we achieved purple though? I just think that's pretty neat how we got purple without blue because we used that neutral tint. So I'm kind of almost lifting up that neutral tint a little bit and bringing it up into the quinacridone. And our irises are definitely dry enough too now where we can make sure they're nice and dark at the top for that shadow part of the eye. All right, I'm just kind of softening a little bit over here, kind of creating a watery shape. It just seemed a little harsh right there to me, but it's hard to even see. It's very light. Grab a little bit of orange too. I just love those layers you can get with doing extra glazes like that. It's pretty fun. I think what would look really cool on this one would be some splatter, some black splatter. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my neutral tint, heavy mix. I don't know, wet, I'm swiping it a little bit, but it's mostly a wet brush. And I'm gonna put some on the light side. And a little bit, that's wet now. So I just shot myself in the foot, being able to put splatter over there. Ooh, I like that a lot. I do like, and then sometimes I make some a little bit bigger, so they stand out. I don't know, what do we think about that one? I'm okay with it. I think that looks kind of neat. And splatter is another one of those things where I could easily go overboard. It gets to be a lot of fun. That I get a little splatter happy. And I do too much. I think somebody who shows very great restraint with splatter would be one of my favorite artists, Sterling Edwards, who uses splatter in really cool ways. It's about making the viewer want more, not being overwhelmed. So if they're like, oh, I wish they would have done more of that, that's a good thing. That's maybe how you know you're in the right place. All right, I want a little bit more dimension right here, I think. And I'm gonna create that purple in my palette. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up some of that purple here so that we don't have to rely on the painting to mix it for us. So cool what you can do with just a few colors. It's just a nice glaze for the dark side of the painting too. I'm kind of negative painting around some of those hair shapes in the ear too with this dark purple that we made. So trying to find that balance between impact and too much. A very watery mix here. I'm wondering if I could just, with a very, very watery mix. I like that. A little bit of a watery mix on that side. I really liked it, so I'm putting a little bit more over there. Kind of want it by the splatter. I think that would look kind of neat. If I can do it really small. The cool thing is too, is that if you do wax your paintings, it's pretty darn easy to wax them right on the block. And I hope you can see how that just transforms It evens out the pigments and makes the whole thing deeper, and it gives it this nice, even, gorgeous shine. I normally don't work on blocked paper because I like to do the window transfer method for my tracings, but I ended up just using carbon transfer paper to trace this onto the block, and it worked perfectly. But the best part is it is flat once it's completely dry. And you can see how painting on a block and then letting that painting dry on the block produces a perfectly flat finished piece. Comparing that to this piece of the same paper that I painted on off of the block, it dried kind of warped. So that is the main reason to use a block. And to get that perfectly flat finished piece, it's worth the extra effort of using carbon transfer paper. I like the idea of using blocks, but they don't typically offer them with the brand and kind of paper I like in the size I typically like to paint in. If you do wax your painting, I would encourage you to let it dry completely on the block and then take it off the block. Don't do what I did. But I hope you can just see just how beautiful and smooth and flat that wax made the art. I am in love with how vibrant it is, the colors we picked, how all the techniques worked. I would say the one thing that surprised me about this Meeden paper was its tendency to create those beautiful pigmented edges without a lot of effort on my part. Typically, I find myself going in and dropping in water and lifting and dropping in water and lifting and pushing that water to the edges of the shapes I painted to create those. And I would say that I'm finding that those are just really happening on this paper in such a beautiful way. I think for me, it's a little on the smooth side, but aside from that, it performed beautifully. I hope you get a chance to try this paper. I really think you're going to love it. I hope you had the best time learning more about this paper and hopefully painting this cat with me. And don't forget to use code Aquila12 at meedenart.com for 12% off your entire order. If you're happy that you stumbled upon this video today, I encourage you to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I will see you in the next video. Happy painting!